right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. So, as you may have figured out, our talk this morning is on creativity and the age of AI. So, lessons from pop culture icons. And that doesn't mean that Todd and I are the pop culture icons. What that means is we're going to pull from design history a little bit this morning and talk about how history maybe doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And how AI is just sort of the latest version of that. And so AI is on the minds of employers and educators such as yourselves and everyone else, of course. And it's already having an impact, as we all know, on both education and creativity. And Todd and I have a point of view about the changing landscape of creativity, and in particular, the powerful and mysterious effects of artificial intelligence, right? And we bet you do too. So don't hold back during this conversation. We're going to share a few points based on a couple of things. So thank you for coming this morning, and thanks to those of you who are online. Hello. Sorry you couldn't be here today. I couldn't scrape the gas money together or get coffee made early enough, but we appreciate you being here virtually nevertheless. And I have to ask the question, is first thing in the morning too early to be in a bar? Just show of hands. I don't think so. We bet you don't think so. Mm, inspiration comes in many diverse forms, and a bar is often a great environment for inspiration. So first, um, you know, who am I? Who is Todd? Todd couldn't be here today. He's sunning himself in a Bora Bora. He's no, I'm teasing you, but he is on vacation. He couldn't be here today. He sends his regret. So I have to do the heavy lifting for two people. And when you guys email later and tell us how amazing this talk was, you got to tell them that I had to do twice the work and that Todd owes me a vacation. And in our day jobs, we both create marketing communications. I own an agency in Winston-Salem. Todd works for an internet security company as their head of creative. And in our free time, if you can call it that, we have a podcast about pop culture and iconic design. And so it is through that framework that I'm going to talk about AI a little bit today. There's always been change, and there always will be when we talk about design and creativity and pop culture, right? It's like these are very amorphous, shapeless, kind of ever changing things. It's kind of like looking at a lava lamp or something, right? And we've all heard a couple different things about AI, right? So AI is the biggest threat to creativity today, and AI is the biggest opportunity for creativity today, right? Can both be equally true? So, where we all sit today, no one knows how many creative jobs will be impacted by AI, going back to what you said. And let's be honest for a moment. A lot of creative production work can be fairly routine, right? It's a lot of repetitive tasks, such as basic production design, content variations, repetitive animations, when you think about those sorts of tasks. And these are a lot of things that, let's be honest, they could be automated, right? You don't need a physical person to always be doing those things. But what we do know is AI lacks emotional depth and personal experience that drives human emotion, right? Jobs requiring complex decision making, emotional intelligence, and unique human insight will thrive. So, AI may reshape these roles, and it will allow humans to focus on higher level creative and conceptual work. So, in other words, it's going to sort of push the drudgery, some of the production tasks out of the way, and it will allow people to have more time with these higher level considerations and go deeper with the creative work they are doing. So AI is a powerful tool to enhance creative processes and enable new possibilities for collaboration and innovation, excuse me. And we know this is true because Todd and I actually asked AI to provide an answer for us. And we happen to agree with this, assuming ChatGPT isn't lying to us, but you never can tell because robots are sneaky bastards, right? We've all seen Terminator. Um, Today's modern digital marketing campaigns are built on audience segmentation and customized audience journeys, right? While this sounds like marketing gobbledygook, we all need to be reminded that major mainstream national marketing campaigns may have thousands of assets to be created, with each one having slightly different combinations of wording and placement in a variety of sizes and formats, right? Today, a junior copywriter writes hundreds of variations of the same proposition. A junior production designer may lay each one out. And is that really the best use of a team's time? What they're getting paid to do. And to break through the clutter, we must have a great idea and we must consistently hit the audience in fresh ways. In short, it is both a quality and quantity play. And one simple smart idea can spawn hundreds of iterations to feed the machine. The idea in itself is not new, but it is different from how many creatives work today, right? So we're still very sort of hands-on with things. So this has precedent, right? This idea. For instance, we made a series of episodes about the emergence of Andy Warhol and the pop art scene. And Warhol, if you remember, turned the art world on its head. Instead of making one single precious artifact, he made hundreds of the same thing. We can argue his value to the art and culture world, but we can't argue that he embraced mechanical assistance to get more of his vision out there and doing it faster. Production efficiency is the biggest opportunity the majority of people think AI will help with in terms of creative work. Look at what came from Warhol's daring to use the mechanical art process. Would we have things like giclées, stenciled graffiti from Banksy, and dare I mention NFTs without Warhol? Like it or not, we have new forms of expression born from that pop art innovation. And the same thing is going to happen with AI, as long as we use the tool instead of being seduced by it. So there is a burgeoning role for AI in education and creative work. And you're probably thinking, okay, like what? Right? So accelerating content creation, we just talked about that. Think about the national campaign with all of its hundreds or thousands of variations, right? Increasing production efficiency, doing more faster, right? By automating some of these tasks. Gaining new research insights. So things like setting up personas of target audiences and then testing some of your ideas against those personas, right? We know a lot of people doing that. I'm actually doing that with some of the work that I'm doing. And then scaling personalized outreach and touches, right? We all want something, we all want to be the center of the universe, right? So when we get these marketing messages that are geared toward us, it's a little bit flattering and strokes our ego a little bit, which is one of the reasons that our feeds are so seductive and the algorithms are so seductive. Going to the humanity piece for a second, we have a couple of recent episodes that we did that are good examples of context and content that only humans would understand. So this is a listener and a fan of ours, this guy from Britain named Paul Hennessy. And he actually runs a couple poster shops in England. And he sent us 10 of his favorite posters to discuss with him. He sent us digital files, and we would love it if he actually sent us the 10 posters because there's some killer posters. And he asked us to each pick one. And so we actually made an episode where we talked about those posters. So Todd picked a Duran Duran poster for Rio. And I decided to pick a Live Aid concert poster. If you guys are old enough to remember what Live Aid was, and if not, go on YouTube and look for it. So the poster on the left was done in 1983, and the poster on the right was done in 1985. So they were done at within a couple years. Again, both from the UK. The interesting thing here with these is neither resemble one another, right? They're both very different, even though they were produced at about the same time. And if you think about it, they were produced for the same audience, right? Or a very similar audience, like music fans in the UK and in the US. Rio was overly slick and new wave, maybe a bit too sexually objectified, right? But it was very beautiful in its simplicity. And it was very true to Duran Duran, right? One of the bands that really came along right at the beginning of MTV, and they both, were catalysts for one another. Live Aid was really the opposite. It was unpolished on purpose, and it was wrong from a design perspective in so many ways, right? When I first laid eyes on this poster, the word that popped into my head was shambolic. Like it's a delightful mess, right? Um, but when you think about the context of the time, the content reflected that. Like I mentioned a minute ago, Duran Duran was a video product, sleek and all about escaping reality, right? Live Aid was about bringing reality to the world, right? It was the cornerstone was people starving in Africa. So it was reality slapping you in the face rather than an escape. Rio was overly produced, and Live Aid was pastiche, right? And you can sort of see that with the collage art. And both worked in their respective ways. And that's why ideation always starts with context. The second example I want to talk about in terms of recent episodes of content and context was our episode 79, Signs of the Times. And we decided we wanted to research the origin stories of all too familiar symbols for barbers and pawnbrokers and try to understand how a barber pole came to represent barbers. It's not scissors, combs, or anything like that. And how three balls came to represent pawnbroken, right? It's not an old TV, it's not jewelry or anything like that. Like how did each of these businesses that are centuries old, how did they get these symbols? So the Medicis on their coat of arms, they had gold circles that were like gold coins because they were merchants. And so long story short, that carried over because they were tradesmen. It carried over into this universal symbol because you got to keep in mind both of these professions came about during the Middle Ages when there wasn't a large amount of literacy. So you needed very quick symbols to so people knew when they were walking into these different businesses what they were. But the point is here, the years have erased the context of these symbols, but the content still remains. And now the content has become the context, right? So you go into a barber shop today, not a hair salon, but a true barber shop, and how many things are striped and how many things are red, white, and blue, right? That barbershop theme goes everywhere. And even in a pawnbroker shop, you may not have the physical dimensional balls hanging outside, but you a lot of times will see that painted on a sign or something like that as a symbol. So where are we today and where do we want to go, right? So context is where the intellectual magic happens, and AI can't do this very well yet. Um, Hell, people struggle with context, right? Um, and when it comes to working with students, one suggestion we have is teaching the value of context as much as you teach design, and students will thrive. So, not just the what, but also the why and where and who. Where is this going to appear? Who is going to be seeing it? That sort of thing. Blank is dead. How often have we heard this, right? It's sort of this idea of fill in the blank. So here are some examples of context over content. This is usually exaggerated, right? Like when this comes about, it's always because we're living in a time of change, right? And certainly AI is the latest in a long list of change agents, right? So what do you think of this quote, right? So this is from 1899. Everything that can be invented has been invented. Has anyone ever read this quote before? Have you heard this quote? So this quote, as it turns out, isn't real. It's attributed to Duell, Charles Holland Duell, but it actually was made up. In fact, he said, in my opinion, all previous advances in the various lines of invention will appear totally insignificant when compared with those which the present century will witness. I almost wish that I might live my life over again to see the wonders which are at the threshold. So the fake quote came from a magazine called Punch. And the Punch was sort of the Onion of its day. And in that edition, that particular issue, this comedy magazine looked at the coming century, right? So keep in mind, this is 1899, right? We're on the dawn of a new age. And it's hard to read this quote, but a genius asked, "Isn't there a clerk who can examine patents?" And a boy replied, "Quite unnecessary, sir. Everything that can be invented has been invented." So the death of tools is often overrated. Um, and if you love The Onion, I need to plug The Onion. I quite literally last night got they're reprinting The Onion again as a newspaper. I got my first Onion in the mail just last night. And it was like Christmas came early for me. If you love The Onion like we do, check out our episode where we dive into Our Dumb Century, which is a book that, and I'll tip my hand a little bit. If there's a fire in my house, the one thing I'm pulling out of it as I leave is this book. Like, my cats are smart. They'll figure it out. I'm taking this book with me. Um, and real quick, there are a couple of other examples of, are you familiar with the idea of the innovator's dilemma, where somebody might have a breakthrough invention, but because they're so bound to that invention, they can't see where it needs to go next, and other competitors take over the market? Um, so this is an example of that sort of thing, right? That there's always going to be something new. There's always going to be an adaptation, an update. So does anyone know who invented the digital camera? What company invented the digital camera? What's that? It was Kodak. And they didn't know how to capitalize on it because they were a film company. Does anyone know who created the GUI interface and the computer mouse? Xerox. Yeah. And again, they thought it was a gimmick. They didn't think it had any application. So where are Kodak and Xerox today? Right? So just because you have this idea or you do this one thing, you've got to be observant about like where people take it, what they do with it, how it grows and changes. Those were both tools. But again, they didn't end up having any business models based on those tools. They couldn't see past the immediate delivery. So pop culture has a way of both repeating and hallucinating history. What do we mean by that, right? The telephone has too many shortcomings to be seriously considered as a means of communication. So this was Western Union in 1876, right? They were the telegraph company. So I think the phone has done all right since then, don't you guys? I mean, tell that to the thousands of people lining up to get the latest iPhone, right? Every year. Phonograph has no commercial value at all. This was from Thomas Edison in 1880. Again, I think music has benefited from the phonograph, among many other things. Man Will Not Fly for 50 years. That was said in 1901 by Orville Wright. So I don't know how many history buffs there are in here, but it only took 2 years after that for flight to start to happen, right? So again, it's this idea that just because you have this initial idea or because you've built this tool doesn't mean you always necessarily know what it's going to do. So again, this idea of the innovator's dilemma. But let's tie it back into art. Let's tie it back into what we're talking about today. So tools come and go and times change. Creative thinkers will always have a job. Although photography was invented around 1839, the daguerreotype proved popular to satisfy the middle class demand for portraiture that painters couldn't compete with by the latter half of the 19th century. So did it put painters out of business? Did painting stop have there been no more paintings since 1839? Right? Of course not. What it did instead was it unleashed creative thinkers like Degas, Manet, Pissarro, Van Gogh, Toulouse-Lautrec, and Picasso to invent movements including Impressionism, Modernism, and Cubism, right? So people had to adapt. They had to change. But look at what came out of that change. And in the same way painting captures things that photography can be in places where painting doesn't make any sense, right? So we actually did an episode, our episode 22, about iconic images and the backstories of these images. So does everybody know these two images? Right? We got our friend Bigfoot on the left. I had to chase him out of my backyard this morning so I could get my car to come over here. And then we have Iwo Jima on the right. Let me just say this about both of these images. You might think you know the origin stories of these, but you don't. There's a lot of mythology around both of these images. And the point is, things change. So use this massive conversation around AI to shape the perception of AI as a tool, as we talked about earlier. Several of you mentioned this. You already have students turning in assignments that are being made with AI, whether you know it or not, like they're monkeying around with it, of course. It kind of goes back to going back to all the changes in design back in the 80s when desktop publishing, came in the forefront, right? When everybody stopped doing paste ups, or they were doing a hybrid of like paste ups and still doing, digital typesetting. Some of the stuff was incredible. There were people who they were excellent designers pre-Mac, right? And they were still excellent designers after the Mac was introduced into the mix because they still had this artistic vision, this elevated sense of craft. They sort of understood the big picture. You also had a lot of clunky stuff from people who are just really fascinated with the first version of PageMaker or Mac Paint or, whatever it happened to be, right? So you had a lot of bad work too. And I think we're really in that bad work phase of AI. I think the other thing is that how AI is really going to work is when it's woven into other tools rather than being standalone tools, right? And I think the reason why a lot of the students aren't like jumping into, whatever Midjourney or Dolly or whatever it may happen to be is because like that's its own thing, even though there are some AI tools and some of the, Adobe tools now, it's still not like they don't know enough about like, say, Photoshop or whatever to be like, oh, this is this additional thing. But like you're still drinking from a fire hose just learning Photoshop. Like, do you guys ever have folks come to you and say, teach me Photoshop? Like I have, younger people who come to me and say like, I want to learn Photoshop, like just Photoshop. And I'll say, you can't. And they'll just say, what do you mean? I'm like, I don't know Photoshop. I'm like, I know how to do things in Photoshop. So I'll always ask, what are you trying to accomplish? And then we'll figure out if Photoshop is the appropriate tool for you to do that, right? So it's this idea of beginning with the end in mind. And so I think if you don't have any end state, yeah, you're going to get janky logos or whatever, right? So what are some of the takeaways with everything that we've been talking about here? Understand AI is just a tool and there is no substitute for creative thinking, right? So that goes back to content, but also context, beginning with the end in mind, having a vision of what it is you're trying to accomplish. And encourage students to rely on the process and not be a slave to the tools. I think this is dovetailing with a lot of what we've talked about so far. And teaching the importance of context, as we just mentioned. And evangelizing ethical considerations in AI-assisted design, right? There's been a lot of talk about ripping off styles, copyright violation, IP violation. So really understanding what it is that's happening when they're availing themselves of these tools and services. Pushing critical thinking about AI's role in creativity. Where is it going? Well, can you take some photos of me too? I forgot to ask about that.
I can talk, but I just have to take some of my body kind of wash.
Yeah, yeah. Enamored, enraptured by my wisdom being shared. Um, Pushing critical thinking about AI's role in creativity. Like, where does it contribute? Where is it falling short? How do you work with it? When do you set it aside? Assigning projects emphasizing human creativity alongside AI, right? And integrating AI tools into your curriculum. It's been encouraging. I've had a chance to look at some of the paperwork here, and that seems to be everybody's accepting reality, right? That this is happening, and it's not a matter of if; it's a matter of when and how. Fostering an environment of responsible experimentation and innovation. And we're all experimenting with AI right now, right? There's nobody who is like a true AI pro. Even people building these tools are still experimenting with them. And I think last but not least, the most important thing, if you take away nothing else today, is you need to listen and subscribe to Two Designers Walk Into a Bar, because that'll make your life so much better. How do you do that? So shameless promotion. Two Designers Walk Into a Bar.com is our email, or excuse me, our website. You can get in touch with us there via email. We have social media accounts. You can springboard from that. We have merch. We have everything. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find us. We're literally all over the place. Wherever your phone is, we are there with you. And I just wanted to say thank you to Eric, and thank you to all of you for the opportunity to talk this morning. I really appreciate your attention and your time.